During what was an overly long, but for our temperamentally mercurial president, a remarkably staid and on-message State of the Union, the president referenced Congress, the literal halls of Congress, as an American monument, and he insinuated in what was a direct address to not the American people, but to members of Congress, that the government, and particularly the legislature, was a symbol of hope to the American people, that it's this grand body towards which people look for justice and embodies the American spirit, that sort of thing. Now, this clearly is not the point of the American dream. The point of the American dream is that individuals acting on their own talents and given a free space, which is created by government, are able to, through their own efforts, define and pursue whatever end that they see fit. The only real limitation being when they start to infringe upon other people's rights. And this is a vastly different version of American good than the one that Donald Trump laid out. Now, if you're more sympathetic to populist messaging, if you suspect that the president has some, not necessarily in government, but rhetorically, some dictatorial tendencies, or if you suspect that Congress has become a sort of oligarchic overclass, then to stand before Congress and to name the actual seat of government an American monument, and to do this to the wild cheers of Congress, is exactly the kind of messaging that you should be trying to avoid. Because when Trump named Congress an American monument, he was speaking not to the American people, but directly to the legislators who are assembled in that room. And this is really problematic, not just because it cements politics in a culture that is very nationalized and is very government dependent, and again, this is contra to the American political mythos, which is very much rooted in the idea of rugged individualism and government as sort of an ephemeral thing that's on the edge of people's lives and is only gone to when absolutely necessary. But because it reaffirms the idea that governors, whether they be the president, whether they be Congress, have not only the ability, but are ethically charged with acting on behalf of the American people, of literally representing their interests. And yes, we have representative government, and this is what our members of Congress are supposed to do, but there's a vast difference between what is known as the delegate and what is the trustee model of representation. These are two different political science theories about how representative government should work. And in one, representatives who are chosen by constituencies are elected simply to carry the vote of those members of the constituency to Congress. That legislator is bound by the will of the people. They don't have the authority to act on their own volition, on their own discretion, to predict what their constituencies might want. They're not allowed to think how their constituents might react given certain knowledge, given certain situations. They are very much bound by the expressed will of the people. The other model of representative government is one where the members of Congress or the legislators are much more loosely bound. The idea being that people who sit in Congress, and particularly people who sit in Congress on committees or subcommittees, have access to specialized knowledge and thus gain expertise over certain policy matters, and are therefore in a position to more accurately judge what's in the best interests of their constituents. And this model is not what's in the heart of the founding of American government. It's not the model that the founders foresaw being preeminent. And it's problematic not only because it makes limited government and self-rule virtually impossible, because government is then adjudicating interest for the people. The people have much less of a say over their good as defined by themselves. It's defined more by government, and this is a much more protectionistic and paternalistic model, but also because it makes government cognizant. I've talked about this before. The idea that when government has the ability to make value judgments, when it thinks about competing needs, when it judges whether problem A or problem B is more worthy of federal attention and support, not only is it impossible to have a sort of parity of rights between people, because now you have government picking and choosing different interest groups that are more worthy of government support, and thus creating a sort of hierarchy of needs and giving different values to citizen groups depending upon what identity they're part of. But it also allows government to become much more active, to become much more unbounded. And this is problematic not only because it makes limited government a much more difficult reality to achieve, but once you have government actors who think and who feel and have value judgments, they're going to have, essentially, they're alive. They're no longer very restrained entities who are more reactionary than proactionary. They now are essentially living entities, which means that not only do they think and they feel, but they have a survival instinct, which means that government is not going only to use value judgments to address political concerns that are rooted in the polity, but it's also going to start thinking about its own ends and its own survival needs, which means that now government, if there's tensions between certain government infrastructure problems and the needs of the people, is going to start defaulting to protecting itself. Again, thus highlighting the oligarchy, which people suspect has risen in our government and which was on display last night. And this is why it might seem a little overblown to take what was a rhetorical moment, this image of a national monument, and say, oh, this is dangerous. But it really does highlight a culture which legislators have, which does not value this idea of limited government, of self-rule. It sees itself as very much ingrained in the public good and very much a constitutive part of providing it. And this is a fundamental rewriting of American political culture.